Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this talk sponsored by the Friends of the Bodleian. I'm Richard McCabe, the chairman of the Friends, and I'm delighted to see so many of you with us here today and also joining us online. Before I introduce today's speaker, I just have a couple of housekeeping announcements for those who are joining us online, which I hope will assist them. For the best view of the proceedings, select Speaker View from the top right-hand button of the screen. You'll notice that automatic closed captioning is in operation, but that can be discontinued very easily by clicking the live transcript button, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. As usual, we will have time for questions at the end of the talk. If you're joining us online, please put these into the Q&A and not into chat, because we'd be looking at Q&A and not chat. It gives me great pleasure then to introduce today's speaker. Adam Lowe is the director of Factum Art and founder of the Factum Foundation for Digital Technology in Preservation. He leads a unique multidisciplinary workshop in Madrid, which has a playground atmosphere that bridges traditional craftsmanship and cutting-edge digital technology to realize works for leading contemporary artists such as Marina Abramovic, Shehzad Dawood and Anish Kapoor, amongst many others. In 2009, Adam founded the Factum Foundation to channel bespoke pioneering technologies towards the preservation of cultural heritage. His work includes, for example, the facsimile of Veronese's wedding at Cana for Giorgio Maggiore in Venice, and the creation of a full-scale replica of Tutankhamun's burial chamber installed in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. The foundation has worked with more than 500 institutions worldwide on the creation of facsimiles, exhibitions, and training programs. Adam is internationally recognized as a leader in the field of design and cultural preservation, and he was named Royal Designer for Industry in 2019 and received an OBE in 2025 for his outstanding contribution to the arts. So please give him a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back in Oxford, where I was just reminiscing as I drove down this morning that I was actually born in Oxford. I went to school in Oxford. I went to university in Oxford. And every time I drift away to Madrid or other parts of the world, I get pulled back. And really, I got pulled back into Oxford significantly about 4 years ago when Richard Ovenden asked Factum Foundation to work on the creation of a centre that would use one of the new scanning systems we developed, which is a scanning system that records the surface of objects. And was it 4 years ago, John? I suppose 4 years ago, with the support of the Helen Hamlin Trust, we started recording objects here in the Bodleian Library, and the project's run by John Barrett, who's been just a great partner over the last 4 years. And I've loved everything that's happened here, because in a funny way, people don't think about 3D recordings as belonging in a library. And what I want to show now is that if you treat anything as an object rather than an image, it reveals itself in very, very different ways. So in today's talk, the talks I give tend to ramble, they tend to go off in different directions, but I promise there's a thread, and I'll try and stay on thread in this one. But really, as it says on the beginning, I want to think about the relationship between libraries, museums, and mausoleums. And they don't necessarily seem to go together, but I hope they will. So, as Richard mentioned, one of the early jobs that Factum Foundation was asked to do 20 years ago was to make a facsimile of Veronese's wedding at Cana, or the island of San Giorgio Maggiore for the Cini Foundation. And 20 years ago, when I used to go to dinner parties in England and say I was making facsimiles, everyone would go, how awful. And this idea that copying somehow was lesser. So one of the themes I want to introduce today is if you stop thinking about, in this case, this vast recreation of the wedding at Cana. It's 10 meters by 7 meters. Stop thinking of it as a copy or a facsimile and think of it as a hyper-realistic representation, a work of art in its own right. And perhaps some of the things that will have happened in the last 20 years will start to make a lot more sense. So when we put it into the refectory, I was incredibly nervous because no one wants Venice to be filled with copies. Although the Campanile is one and the horses on the front of St. Mark's are one, and there's plenty of examples we can talk about. But obviously, the painting had been removed at the end of the 18th century. And in fact, the whole history of the refectory, which is designed by Palladio. So really this was about place and about time. So painting and the building and the function the painting was painted for all merged together. And when we put it back, some fascinating things happened. So straight away, the painting has a time. When the light comes in through this window, this wall falls in shadow, and the shadow on the wall of the painting corresponds to the light, the darkness on the wall. And the two figures on the extreme left, the light never hits the painting, but the two figures on the extreme left, the bride and groom in the wedding, become centre stage. So actually, this painting, which is probably one of the most complex compositions in the whole Western canon of painting, was painted for the monks of San Giorgio to eat in front of every day, to contemplate in silence this extraordinary work on the end, part of the whole environment they were eating within. And I think if you look, you see the design of the tables in the painting corresponds to the monks sitting either side. The abbot is underneath the figure of Christ in the centre of the painting. This is an engraving by Coronelli, the painting was copied from the time it was finished. Copied so much that the monks got cross and stopped having people coming in to copy the painting. But it was, from the time it was unveiled, was one of those legendary pictures, and possibly the point at which that painting and music took over as the dominant art form from architecture. So the relationship between the painting and the building was critical. It was copied throughout history. And this is a reproduction of a John Baptist Jackson chiaroscuro woodcut of the painting. And every time I look at this woodcut, I'm absolutely amazed by John Baptist Jackson's skill at actually recreating the whole complex narratives that are going on within the painting. I mean, there's always a few points I'd like to point out, but right up in the top right, you can just make out the figure of a woman leaning over a balcony, dropping roses onto the table. So spatially, he's doing fascinating things. There's a bunch of roses midway down the first column falling, and then there's other roses on the table. Some of the people here are looking up at the falling roses. So what he's doing with the composition is staggering. And John Baptist Jackson's captured all of that, except those funny figures sort of cascading down one building that I think he printed in the wrong plate. So the chiaroscuro woodcut is made up of various plates inked in different colour, printed over each other. And every time I look, those figures should look more like the figures on the left that should be embedded into the painting. But it's an extraordinary feat of looking, carving, making, copying in dialogue with the original painting. The painting gets moved by Napoleon's troops to Venice in, I can't remember the exact date, the 1890s. And it becomes the main painting in the Louvre. I'll go there in a minute. But while it was in the Louvre, while it is in the Louvre still, it was copied by many of the great artists of the 19th century. So Delacroix particularly talks about it a lot. This is a little copy by Cézanne of the figures on the right-hand side. And I think looking at this and thinking about what John Baptist Jackson was doing in his copy and what Cézanne's doing in this copy, you can start to see that copies serve many, many different functions. And here it's not really about Veronese, it's really about Cézanne. And it's possibly really about Cézanne and inability to articulate what John Baptist Jackson could articulate. And it's almost as if it's about doubt. It's someone looking at this great masterpiece and questioning himself. So I think copies serve many functions, and it's starting to think about what happens if we can record really accurately. What happens to the narrative, to the object that we're thinking about and working with. Napoleon's troops took the painting, and in the Louvre it hangs like a painting. It's framed, so these are very big differences. You change the height, you change the way it's meant to be looked at. You put it inside a big gold frame, changes the picture space rather than filling the entire wall in the end of the refectory as a whole screen that engages with the architecture. It's got two doors either side of it. So this is the main gallery in the Louvre. There's a very famous little picture now hanging in front of it, and I'll show you that in a second. But the two doors either side means that the picture can no longer serve its function as a focus for contemplation. Although in 1957, the Louvre was relatively peaceful and people would go to the museum to look. And what I love about this photograph is to look and to talk. Those seem to be the two activities that really allow objects to come alive. And if you can discuss them, share them, think about them, engage with them, they can alter dramatically. If you go to the Louvre today, you have an image like this. So I took this picture in, I think, 2018. So this is just pre-COVID. And I was mildly amused by looking at all of these people. The two doors have gone because they have to get more people in and out of the room, so they've now opened up either side. But it really looks like the wedding at Cana is spilling out this audience. It's as if they're all falling out of the painting and they're sort of wearing the right colours, more or less. But that's a normal day in the Louvre. And one of the fascinating things is the very small number of people looking at the wedding at Cana are actually taking selfies with the Mona Lisa in the background. So this picture, which up until the end of the 19th century was probably the most famous picture on the planet, has now been surpassed by this picture, which in a way is the opposite of the wedding at Cana. This is a small painting. It's highly focused. It's highly enigmatic. And it doesn't require looking at constantly, daily, rethinking, you projecting onto it. So it's a very different kind of painting. And now it's a very different way of looking. So I think if you go to the top camera in the middle, the white frame that you see on the screen of the mobile phone is actually the frame of the bulletproof glass that surrounds the Mona Lisa. You can just see it on either side. Then you have the gold frame, and then you have the Mona Lisa that's occupying just a few pixels on the screen. So there's a question here, I think, about what it is you're looking at. And, of course, part of this is you're looking at celebrity. You're ticking off one of the great pictures. You're not particularly engaging with it as a painting. You're engaging with it as a celebrity figure. And you participate in this. But there's barrier after barrier. There's the first layer of glass on the frame. There's the bulletproof glass in front of it. There's the 50 lux of light. There's then the barrier that prevents you from getting within 5 meters of it. And then you're probably behind a number of people. And then there's the screen of your mobile phone. So there's all these removes, 1 remove, 2 removes, 3 removes, 4 removes, which really turns the painting into a reproduction of itself, because you can't see its surface. You can't engage with it close up. And I mean, I suppose we think of the Mona Lisa as being the most famous painting on the planet. But actually, the most famous painting on the planet is the Virgin of Guadalupe, who's visited by twice the number of people each year than the Mona Lisa. Only here, I think we could probably say that the Virgin of Guadalupe is not really a painting because it's meant to be made without human contact. So it's meant to be made in the shawl, the cloak of the peasant who collected the lilies and brought them back, and the Virgin appeared. So there's a narrative about it not being made and not being a copy, but being an impression of the Virgin Mary. And so when you go to visit the Virgin of Guadalupe there, you're on moving platforms, and you're moved past. And in fact, 2 platforms go one way and 1 goes the other. So it's quite an interesting configuration. And the picture hangs 7 meters above you as you're brought past it. So you're getting something. The pilgrims who go there, the 20 million pilgrims who go there, are getting something from this picture. But again, it's a different kind of looking. It's an experience rather than an act of looking carefully. The way I like looking at pictures is a bit more like this. So this is what we call a viewer. So it's looking at one of Goya's black paintings. And we have lots of different data sets all aligned together. And we can juxtapose the data. You can study it, you can think about it, you can talk about it, you can engage with people around you. You don't have to be in the Prado, but you can constantly, well, I live in Madrid, so I can constantly go back to the Prado and re-engage with the painting. But this approach, so when I started 25 years ago, focusing on recording paintings, the surface of paintings, there was a fear amongst many people I knew in the art world and the museum world that digital technology was going to lead to increasingly virtual engagements. So the actual physical object would be lost. But weirdly, in 25 years, and I hope as I talk along through this, you'll see it happening. But weirdly, it's led to a much more deeper engagement with the physicality of the objects. And it's led to people thinking that photographs and reproductions in books, which is how most art history is looked at these days, lose the materiality of the object. But digital technology can bring that back. And you can literally handle things in different ways. So this is a Giulio Romano image that was recorded by John Barrett in the Bodleian. What you can see, this is recorded using the Silene system that they use here in the Bodleian, which was designed by the team in Factum, and records the surface of things. But I love looking at Giulio Romano like this. And I remember when I was a student, I was fortunate enough to have a studio within the Ashmolean and could go up to the drawing department and look at these things, particularly the late Michelangelo drawings that have equally as much texture and are very heavily overworked. And this tells you so many things. So it tells you about how the drawing was conceived, about the composition, about the relationship between the marks and the paper. And like so many drawings of Raphael or of Giulio Romano, there are what we call dry point incisions, but there are incised marks which have no colour, which are mapping out the space which the drawing then fits into. In this case, there are also lines that show the drawing's been copied, so it's been traced over, and these are indentations of tracing it off that follow some of the figures. And the figure on the right has, for some reason or another, not been copied or traced or incised. I think there's very interesting work going on at the moment as a result of the recordings that John made in the Ashmolean that are allowing a really close analysis of Raphael's drawing technique. And on a tangent, we had the great privilege of recording Raphael's cartoons for the Victoria and Albert Museum. And after months of looking at things, and again, I love the fact that recording things slows you down, so you have to look, it takes time, and you have time to focus and think very differently. But the Raphael cartoons are covered in little pouncing mark or pinpricks. And the simple fact is, no one had really paid them a lot of attention. But you don't pounce something to make a tapestry. Pounce something to make a copy. And it seems highly likely that Raphael valued the cartoons so highly, he didn't want to cut them up and send them to Belgium. And he made a derivative set. And it's from the derivative set that the Vatican tapestries are probably made. And after Raphael's death, the cartoons in the V&A were cut up. And almost certainly they're the ones that were used to make the copies that are in Mantua, in Madrid, and the set that was destroyed in Berlin. But I think objects have trajectories, and they tell stories. And the more you get into the stories, the richer the objects become. So I actually have got to the point where I really dislike looking at reproductions in books because they don't tell me what I want to look at. And increasingly, I love the engagement with the surface that we can have when we're looking at something. And artists have always known that the surface is critical. Surface and reflection change the way you see things. And these are two pictures I took in the Fra Angelico show in Florence earlier this year. And just by moving a few feet from left to right, the painting changes dramatically. Whether the head is embedded within the halo, or whether the halo becomes like a contraluce, which forces you to see the head completely differently. I love the way the gold in the background can either become dark or light. So this is a dynamic act of looking. I like the comparison between this and the people looking at the Mona Lisa. These are very different ways of looking. And so in the downstairs in the Bodleian Library, in the imaging services, John is recording the surface of things. This is not one recorded there, this is recorded in Madrid. But if you record the surface of a vellum manuscript, you might find, and I'm not going to give details, John, you might find a thumbprint, or you might find an indentation, or you might find evidence of the first engraving done by William Blake. All of these things had never been noticed until they were recorded. And once they're recorded, they become the subject of study. But this is from Fra Angelico in the Prado, and you can see how he's controlling surface and gold and punch marks. This is a nice little example of a painting we were asked to make for the Catharina convent in Utrecht. So again, now we're thinking about originality not as being fixed. So originality is a process, it's not a state. I mean, I look at myself in the mirror, I know it's a process, and I don't look like I did 25, 30 years ago. And nor did this painting. So the one on the left, in fact, both of these are facsimiles, but just pretend they're not for a second. The one on the left is how the painting looks now. And the bluey green colour in the background was added in the late 17th, early 18th century, when there was a difference in taste and style. And so the painting was altered. We were called in when the conservators were told they shouldn't remove the blue-green paint, but they wanted to see what the painting would look like if it was removed. So we scanned the surface, we remade it, and the two paintings have very, very different qualities. And in a way, now the original painting looks like the one on the left, and the facsimile looks like the one on the right. But these two things reveal a dialogue that's going on over time. And they raise lots and lots of questions about the meaning of this painting. So the minute you take away the green, suddenly the four angels catching the blood become the subject of the painting. The halos don't dominate the heads in the same kind of way. So by looking at it, I mean, the whole of the relationship between the ground and the skull, and the bones, the materiality, the earthiness, and then the elevation into another world changes if you take away the patterned background. And I think it's this sort of approach that technology is allowing us to think about now. So I want to shift a little. This is an image of the whack-whack tree from the Book of Curiosities, which is an 11th century manuscript held here, 11th, and almost certainly made in Egypt, but we don't quite know. And what I want you to do is to think, with the recordings that John's doing here in the library, we can actually look at the surface of the drawing like this. And normally, I mean, these are videos because I'm talking to you, but normally I'd be handling these on the computer, and you can move it any way you want, and you can look at it however you want. And you notice these slash marks that cut off the heads of all the figures growing out of the tree. But for conservators, this is super important information. And it's allowing you to look at how the different pigments are cracking, how they're responding with the surface of the vellum, how they're flaking off, peeling off. And once you look at an object like this, you start realizing that even drawings and watercolors, body colors, paintings onto vellum or paper, have a surface which is super important. And when John and I were looking at a manuscript this morning, you look at the azurite on illuminated Bible, and it has volume, and especially if it's in good condition. And it's, you have amazing relief on the objects you're looking at. So far I've been talking about recording things, but the developments in technology and the developments that we're playing with in Factum and working with in Factum are also to do with output technologies, how you print things, how you rematerialize them, how you give the things the qualities that they actually have. So here you have a reproduction on the left of a nature print by Alois Auer. It's from Polygraphische Apparat, which is one of the great books where Auer demonstrates all of the different printing techniques he patented within the Austrian state print works. And nature printing, by definition, has surface, because it's a transfer of an actual specimen stamped into a bit of lead, recreated using electrolysis, and then printed as an etching where you're putting the ink into the relief. And this is a 3D print on the left of specimens of moss. So it's octavo, it's 15 by 23 centimetres. It's tiny. So each little bit of moss is maybe this big. And on the right, if you remove the colour, so it's something we talk about a lot, the colour can show you how something looks, but if you remove the colour, you see it very differently. And often you see many more things than you can see with the colour. So if the colour is obviously a very important part of a thing, but it's also noise, it's also distraction. And in all the things Factum does, we're looking to record, we're looking at this relationship between noise and information. And we want as much information as possible, and we want to be able to control the noise and the amount of noise it has. But in Factum at the moment, this is hot off the press. I think it's maybe a month old. So we're developing new methods of handling it and looking at it online. So in Madrid, we can scan this specimen and John can look at this in the Bodleian, or any of you can look at this at home like this. And to me, think back to the beginning, think back to the people in the Louvre. You can't look at the Mona Lisa like this. Actually, you could if you had her on your mobile phone. You could engage with it. You can put this data on your mobile phone. You can change the light source. So all of a sudden, in a digital world, you can handle things. So in this world that was meant to become increasingly virtual, it's becoming increasingly tactile. And for me, that's the most exciting thing I can imagine. As a painter, originally I started doing what we're doing because I was horrified by the restoration that changed the surface of things, and horrified by the idea that no museum at that time, 25 years ago, recorded the surface of their object. And every restoration, that's what changes. It's the surface. And the surface contains so much information. It's not just superficial information, although of course it is. It's fundamentally important information for us to understand the object. The second little innovation that's going on at the moment, which goes a little bit further than I just showed you, is being able to control the light. So if you look down here, this is Tiffany, and Tiffany's working on this. She's going to control the light on a copper plate that John recorded here in the Bodleian using hand gestures and using the keyboard to zoom in. So for studying etchings and copper plates and manuscripts and things everyone thinks of as flat, you get this amazing access that I never even had access to in the Ashmolean as a student handling a Michelangelo. I couldn't zoom into it like this. So it's the mixture between the object itself and the different representations that give us access to its content that is the subject I want you all to focus on today. And I mean, this image, John and I were joking, I think John recorded this 4 years ago. So for us, this is quite old hat. But I still use it because every time I show it, I get that slight butterfly feeling that this is the surface of an engraved plate in the Rawlinson collection in the Bodleian Library. And everything you're looking at here is the surface is designed to capture the ink that you put on it. So the image is entirely defined by the surface of this copper plate, whether it holds whether it holds the ink or whether the ink is wiped away off the surface. And this to me is the topography of a copper plate that's the most magical thing I can imagine. And it reveals why that copper plate does what it was meant to do. And the same principles apply to this little wax tablet. So one half of this wax tablet is written in cursive Latin, and the other half is written in Greek. I don't know which is which. I don't read cursive Latin and I don't read Greek. But if you scan it, it looks like that. And at this point, things get incredibly exciting because you can feed this information through many of the optical character recognition software that exists now and are used a lot within universities and within scholarship. Because you can turn this into, using transcribers, for example, into English. So while scholars still need to know how to read cursive Latin or Greek or medieval Arabic or other things, there's a far greater level of access to this information than there's ever been. So this can be put online, people can see it, they can study it, they can engage with it, and they're not kept away from it. So for me, the big thing that the technologies are doing is they're bringing this information before more and more and more people. And that's the great goal of scholarship. That's the great goal of what we're doing to digitize and document. And of course, I can't do a talk like this without talking about AI or machine learning or pattern recognition. I mean, one of the things we've been doing for 5 years with Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland in the States is to take a group of paintings by El Greco. So we chose El Greco because when I was brought up, El Greco was the painter who was meant to have bad eyesight and working alone and was this eccentric mark making. But the truth is, he worked with a studio, he worked with a team, the paintings are highly intentional, he had systems for copying. We've been recording the crucifixions at different scales, and they go mark for mark. It's not colour by numbers, it's much more complex, but it's amazing the systems he was using. And so we were trying to say, can we use what computers do best, which is recognise pattern, number crunch, look for a kind of universal language that humans don't look for, so they don't think like humans, they're doing something completely different. And could we say, based on the depth of brush marks and the way they're made, this mark was made by El Greco, this mark was made by Jorge Manuel, his son, this mark was made by assistant A, B, C. And could you then look at these paintings and show whose hand was there? Well, I think it's on Factum's website, and I can never remember where it was published, but the article has just come out, and there's very interesting results starting to emerge. It's taken 5 years to get to the beginning, but as all the technology speeds up, we'll get to the next bits much faster. Okay. Speed up a bit now. We do very little things. So we used to just record paintings, and then we started recording manuscripts, and then John was doing some work recording fossils at the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, and so then we started saying, could we record insects so that the specimens gathered in the 19th century could be studied with artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms to look at the evolution of insects over the 150-year period that people have been collecting specimens. And this is not from Darwin's collection, but imagine it was. And this is what's called a Gaussian splat of a little scarab that was recorded in Factum. And we've been trying to pioneer methods for recording insects fast, because I believe there's 2 billion that need to be recorded in order to extract the information from them. And the Natural History Museum in London is now working with natural history museums all over the country to try and find the best way to do it. But now, in a way, I'm getting to what we've just been doing in Oxford. So about a year ago, we ran a test project to see if we could record the whole of the ceiling of the Divinity School. And obviously in this we're very dependent on, well, in this case Duncan Taylor, who has been studying the bosses and the ceiling for many years. And again, what I always say is that Factum doesn't know very much, except we know how to record things. That's the subject. But then we need the experts to come in from different fields, different avenues, to look at what we've recorded and say, that's not the information I want this. You know, with the insects, it's getting the bug people to say, I want to know about butterfly genitalia, which is one of their obsessions. And, you know, can we record that properly? Or I want to know about the tool marks on the bosses. So, I mean, a year ago, these are two that we recorded. And and these are recorded with cameras. And the last photographic recording of the ceiling, which was beautifully done in 1914, records amazing pictures of the bosses. And we can see how they've changed since 1914. That's, for me, fascinating, because everything's in a process of change. But here, using photogrammetry, we can capture high-resolution detail of the bosses. So we did the first test, and these were shown in the Western Library on its 10th anniversary last year. And we came back in February and recorded the majority of the rest of the ceiling. So this is William Orchard's signature, one of the bosses, which I think is an amazing bit of carving. So all of these, I think, they blew my mind. This is second half of the 15th century. Carvings in this condition. I mean, were they painted? Were they not? There are many, many questions about their whole history, which in a way Duncan can answer and I can't. But, you know, so many sculptures of this time were painted, so possibly these were. Some places you can see the eyes have paint or things, but I don't know what happened to them. But I'm sure that scholarship now, they have this kind of data, will start to analyse, look at, question, find new sources, new references. This one is the Trinity. And I think that the rays of light carved in stone is inspired. I mean, I look at this and you go, that's an amazing piece of carving. How do they, it's a bit like looking at one of those amazing ivory Chinese balls, and you think, how do they carve within the ivory ball another ball, and how do they do pattern? I mean, this is incredible carving. And how many people talk about medieval English carving these days? I mean, it's a niche subject, but to me this should be one of the really great topics. When I showed you the Virgin of Guadalupe, she was made without touching. The Veronica that appears here, carved in stone, is actually a similar thing. The Veronica's veil is a print from, or an imprint from the face of Christ onto the veil of Veronica. And it's amazing how often in printmaking history Veronica's veil appears, because it's a little conceit printmakers play with. So the first colour print, for example, is a Veronica's veil. There's the great Claude Mellin, the one made from the one, the spiral of the face of Christ on the cloth made from a single line. You have a whole lot of games being played with the images and the language. This may seem like a segue, but I'll try and keep it back. I started talking about realism, and very often, I mean, Factum is like this sort of magic place, and when we start thinking about something, suddenly an email will come in and say, will you go and record, in this case, the Ipogeo Cristallini in Naples? The Ipogeo Cristallini is a group of 4 tombs. They're Greek tombs from the 3rd century BC. So from the time of the tombs of let's say, the so-called tomb of Philip II in Vergina, it's a direct historical counterpart. But this, the face of Medusa, is probably the best preserved Greek polychrome painting. So I mentioned when we were looking at the Divinity School, were these painted? So sculptures being painted is something that has obsessed me for very obvious reasons. So Greek sculptures being painted, and you just have to think about the Elgin marbles. So here you have a very interesting narrative that we would love to work in much greater depth. So I'm now working with some of the specialists in Greece looking at polychrome painting. But this one's in Naples. And so we scanned the Medusa. This is a facsimile, sorry. The bit of masking tape is me leaving a note for one of the people who are finishing it to say, I don't like this bit. And there's a funny encoded language that goes on in Factum. But here she is from the side. And again, if you, well, I may show you, but I may run out of time. I'm going to try and do a little trick on here. May not let me. Well, so what we're doing, and I'm not going to show you all of this because I want to get to the end, but this is us looking at a locality, a place, and going in. This is flying across Naples, and this is the area where the Ipogeo is. The white shape in the middle is the tomb, and it'll come into focus in a minute. But this is part of a new virtual tour we're doing for the museum there. So people can go in and you can go around the whole of the Ipogeo like a computer game. You can zoom into any part, anything you want to study, into sub-millimetric detail. And you can do it on your phone as well, but phone is slightly lower resolution because we can't get the data. But on the big computers there, you can really analyze and study this tomb in amazing detail. And so I hoped I could just fast forward through here, but it doesn't matter. Today, I have a team in Vergina, in the north of Greece, recording the fresco, the wall painting, one of the better preserved wall paintings in Greece. And this is the rape of Persephone being whisked off on a chariot of 2 horses. But like paintings that are this old, so from the 3rd century BC, they've degraded quite a lot. They've worn down. But the really exciting thing here is we can now compare Greek wall painting done in Greece, with Greek sculptural painting done in Naples. With Factum portraits, so Greek encaustic painting done in Egypt. And these are all Greek paintings. So really we're starting to look at what was mimesis, what was realism to a Greek artist. We know all the stories of curtains being so well, birds flying down to pick grapes that were so well painted, and curtains being drawn apart that fooled humans. So it's not just about trickery. It's about what qualities do you need for this to read as the person it represents. So at the beginning I said think about the original Veronese painting and the facsimile of the Veronese painting, and think about the facsimile as being a hyper-real representation of the painting. This is a hyper-real representation made in the probably 2nd century AD of a real person. And when you look at the Factum portraits, one of the reasons they're in such good condition is they're painted in encaustic, and they haven't aged badly. I mean, some have, but this one hasn't. And I look at this and you think of a Lucian Freud painting and the way the paint builds up, where he's looking, the focus. if you moved this and I showed you a different angle, the mouth would look really like a mouth. This one was taken so the eyes look really like the eyes. And it's realism, I think, that's the subject. Oh, sorry, yes, that's a scan of half a face. I think you can just about see it. There's one eye, and this is the chin here. So that's a scan of a fine portrait with the colour removed. This one was in Boston, where we recorded it in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. But now we're starting to talk about this question. And I was a realist painter, that's how I get to this point. But they don't look like photographs, they didn't. But actually, this is really what you're representing and the way you're representing it, visible at the same time. And for me, this is the really exciting thing in all of the work we're doing, is you're recording both objects and their materiality and the images they carry. So you've got layer after layer after layer. And suddenly culture becomes super exciting again. And you can tell vastly different stories. I mean, very quickly, because I want to, how am I doing on time? I've got 5 minutes. And one of the projects we're working on now, which started back in 2009, when I was asked to make a visitor centre for Caravaggio's painting in the town of Caravaggio. And we made these 3 paintings from San Luigi Francesi and put them into the Church of John the Baptist in the town of Caravaggio. And it was the first beginning of a research centre, which actually never developed beyond this. But we had banks of lighting, so you could light the paintings in different ways. You had computers, so you could zoom right in and study them. But I was always a bit sad this project didn't go ahead, because I don't know how many people here have been into the Church of San Luigi Francesi in Rome, but the Contarelli Chapel is there, and it's exactly as it was painted. So it hasn't changed significantly. There's one little alabaster window, and it's very, very dark. Now you put your €2 into the light, and it goes, and suddenly you have light bouncing everywhere and bouncing off the surface. But these paintings in San Luigi Francesi were meant to be seen with torches and candles. And what would a Caravaggio look like? Illuminated with a candle, or with a bank of candles, or with torches on the wall and a bank of candles. And so when we go to museums now, we don't often think about the fact that the lighting we're looking at the pictures under is not really telling us how we should be looking at the picture. And you can't these days. Well, actually, this is an exhibition we did in Basel at the Antiken Museum of the tomb of Seti I, where the opening of the exhibition was illuminated by candles, only they had to be electric ones. They were quite good, and they flickered, and they did things, but they wouldn't let me use real candles in the museum. But even here, suddenly, you get the feeling that you're in the tomb. What you're seeing is illuminated close to you, and the relief on the surface brings it into your space. You have a totally different visceral experience to the object. So to wrap up, my favourite project of Factum's in the last probably 10 years was we were invited to go to work with the indigenous community in the Upper Xingu. And we started with a sort of typical Western, slightly arrogant approach. And we took all our new technology into the village. And it was just an incredibly funny situation, because we arrived and all the kids gathered round, first of all, and looked at our drone and just said, we've had better drones than that here. But as we got to know the community, and we did work, and it helped them determine whether their village, the new village they were just building, was bigger or smaller than the old one, which was a controversy at the time. So we got very close to the community there. And initially we were with the Kikoru, who were one group, and then this man, Akari Wauja, said we had to go because he was the person communicating the oral history of the Wauja people, which is in the same area. And so we went with Akari. Sorry, this image is the sacred cave of Kamakuwaka, being used to educate and pass on the oral history of the community to the youngsters. So Akari is the storyteller and he communicates their oral history. When we got there to record the sacred cave, it had been completely vandalized. So every petroglyph had been hacked off the surface very crudely and very fast. So someone had gone in, and Akari here is picking up the bits. And there's a rather wonderful video on Factum's website where Akari's talking and panicking. And he's very worried that the bits of the sacred cave are so powerful that if they fall into the wrong hands, they could be misused. So magic and image making plays a very important part in Egypt, but actually in pretty much all cultures. And Akari threw all these bits into the river so they could never be found. And he was incredibly worried. I slightly wish he hadn't done that, but he had his reasons, and obviously he was the custodian. So custodians do what they think best for their objects based on the knowledge sets they have. And Akari threw the bits away. We were able to scan the whole damaged tomb, so you can see it up here at the top. And we were then able, working with the community and from historical photographs, to create depth maps and remake all the damaged areas. And this is notations. We gave the 3D prints. I mean, the picture actually here is one of my favourites, in fact. It's a group of the indigenous communities looking at 3D scans of the sacred tomb, and in different coloured felt tips, they were marking things that they thought they could see that were fed to Akari and the other experts to reconstruct. We then reconstructed the section where all the petroglyphs are, which is about 8 meters across, and it was shipped back to the community. And this is now Akari working with the kids, rather like the first image, teaching the oral history of the community to the children now. And in something that makes me feel the world is all right, really, the local community decided that the facsimile now contains the information that they need for the continuation of their culture and tradition, while the original vandalized tomb, which is just outside the preserved area, becomes a relic, becomes evidence of the struggles they've had to face and contend with in recent years. So it's a complete inversion. So I wouldn't say the originality has migrated here, but I would say that the information that's important in that object has migrated here. Thank you.